Well, good day and welcome to our Jeremiah overview video. And today we're going to look at Jesus' longing for each one of us in Jeremiah. And you see it right through Jeremiah. Even though the people have sinned, they've turned their back on God, and God sees it as adultery. He's shown that love to them, but they have chosen not to return the love back. And he sees this rebellious people before him, just like Jesus did in the New Testament when he stood before Jerusalem and he began to cry over that city. And he says that they weren't willing to return to him. And it's exactly the same in Jeremiah. He sees the people, but they're not willing to return to him. One preacher said that every person trying to get into hell will have to push past Jesus to get there. But I want to add to that every person going to hell has to push past a weeping Jesus. And we see it in Jeremiah. God says that he speaks to them again and again. That what he wants is he wants them to have true rest for their souls. He wants to truly bless them and save them. But the problem is their sin is in the way. And God cannot justly ignore that. It has to be dealt with. And God is very patient with them in Jeremiah, continues to warn them, and it says that they just keep ignoring his words. And God says, if only you would just acknowledge your guilt, if only that you would just return to me in a truthful and meaningful way. But it says that the people just had none of it. They just kept rejecting his words. And Jesus shares that, he says, "Oh, that my head were a spring of water, and my eyes were a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people." Jesus says that if my head was a spring of water, if there was constantly water in them, he says, I'm so broken inside about people that are sinning. I'm so broken inside about people that are lost. He said, I would just keep crying and crying until using up all of that water. He says, my eyes would just be a fountain of tears, and I would weep day and night. And it's almost like saying he's been weeping so long that he's been tired, there's no water left, and he says, give me more water to weep for them. And that is the longing of his heart, that love that is in his heart. You see, because what the church had done is that they had committed adultery. It was like spiritual adultery. And not only had they done that, even after they had done that, Jesus says that they continued to frown at him. In other words, they continued to pull a face at him. They're looking at him with a frowned face. And in one verse, Jesus says that they're roaring at me like a lion. Could you imagine that situation, that the wife has committed adultery to the husband? And that's how Jesus describes himself in Jeremiah. He says, I am your husband, and return to me. But the wife has committed that adultery, and instead of looking and accepting the guilt and turning from that, she's just growling at him and screaming at him. And it breaks his heart. And in fact, the fact that his heart can be broken shows you his love. And in chapter 4, Jesus just is overwhelmed with the emotion, and he says this, my anguish, I river in pain, the agony of my heart pounds within me, I cannot keep silent, for I've heard the sound of the trumpet. He says, I've heard the battle cry. Jesus says judgment is going to come because of this. He says, but I want you to know it breaks my heart. And Jesus really shows you his heart. And even though he has to bring judgment, and even though he has to bring discipline, it breaks his heart. And he says to the church, you've provoked me to this point where I can no longer endure your wickedness. I've been patient with you, asking you to return and return, but you didn't return. And so the church is then put out to exile into Babylon. But the good news is, Jesus says there's going to come a time when the church is going to seek me with tears, and they're going to bind themselves to me. And isn't that amazing, is it? How Jesus, who is that husband of the church, comes crying to the wife, and there's going to come a time when the church is going to come crying back and say, take me back, I'm returning to you. So God bless and amen.